Good morning. My name is Porter Anderson. I am the editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives, and I'm delighted you're with us. Thank you for joining us in a very important session. We're pleased with the fact that it's placed where it is in the center of the book fair, because this is a central topic to all of us. Data, how do we use it? What its importance is? Why aren't we using it more? And why don't we understand its importance better? When you come out of this session, you will understand more about it. We all will. This is a very, very telling report that WIPO has brought to us. So, in welcoming you to Frankfurter Buchmesse, I'm glad that you're with us. I hope that you'll feel free to stay as long as you can. We will have time for a little questioning at the end. And then, if you would like, stay with us after that. We have Jesus Badenes, the mastermind of Grupo Planeta's book division. You may want to stay for that if you have the time. If you need to run out to a meeting, we all understand. This is Frankfurt. Stay with us as long as you can. We're going to start this morning with Kevin Fitzpatrick, who is going to give us the details of the new report coming in from WIPO. The report, I'm telling you, is so important. It is just being released today as we speak on this occasion. We are also joined by the Sheikha Badur Al-Qasimi. She is, of course, the publisher of Kalimat. Many of us forget sometimes this is a publisher among us, too. But she is the president of the International Publishers Association. And she has done an amazing job in her 2-year presidency. She will be succeeded shortly by Karini Panza. We're excited about the new administration as well. And really, Badur has everything to feel proud of as she finishes her extraordinary term. She's traveled even more than I have, and that's hard to do. We also have our friend from the Writers Union of Argentina. Deborah is with us. Deborah Mandani is going to be speaking with us. And we have from NVB my colleague, Ronald Schild, who is going to be speaking to us. He is a very fine and insightful business head among all of us in the publishing industry, particularly when it comes to technology and to the use of data. As we hand over to Kevin, I'll just say that I was with Charlie Redmayne, who is the CEO of HarperCollins UK. A very prominent leader in the business, and one sharp cookie when it comes to understanding what's happening to the industry before it happens to the industry. First thing out of his mouth was data. He is very aware of the importance of understanding how to use data to leverage it for the purposes we need. And one of the things he's talking about at this point, and as a matter of fact, is AI, and how he's learning to use the data-driven responses from his readership to look for where they can have automated narration occur in audiobooks. This is a whole side field starting to open very quickly. You'll probably be hearing more about it. But at this point, to get ourselves oriented and to understand exactly what we're talking about today, I'd like to turn it over to WIPO's Kevin Fitzpatrick. If you will, Kevin, give us the background.
Thank you very much, Porter, and good morning, everybody. Just to let you know, we are going to be having English and Spanish. So if anybody hasn't collected a headset, please do so by the door. It'll be on channel 1. Just stay on channel 1. So WIPO is the United Nations Agency for Intellectual Property. And I'm going to give you a 5-minute overview of the publishing industry in 2021. This is our preliminary release of the data, and more complete results will be available later in the year. However, this pre-release report is available on our website and on the Book Fair website and on the IPA website. So please do go and take a look at the preliminary release. A big thank you to our numerous partners, the IPA, FEP, CELAC, the various national publishers associations, ISBN agencies, and legal deposit repositories. We have data from 72 countries at a title level and 27 countries with revenue data. And that's an increase of 4 countries from the previous year. By way of background, during the pandemic, if we compare 2020 to 2019, 2/3 of countries recorded a decline in the number of titles published. However, in 2021, emerging from the pandemic, world economies generally grew, and 6% is the growth figure for world economies. And this includes the publishing industry. Looking at the sales figures for the publishing industry in 2021, we're able to make comparisons for 23 countries, and the combined publishing industry revenue for 2021 was $71.6 billion US dollars, which compares to 64.4 in 2020. So that's an 11% increase in the sales figures of the countries for whom we have comparable data. Most countries, in fact, did report higher revenue in 2021, but amongst the higher performing markets, we saw growth in the US of 13.6%, in Italy of 12.2%, in Japan 7.5%, the UK 5.1%, and Germany 3.5%. And the general trend of the last many years is that the trade sector accounts for more than half of total sales. The trend towards digitalization continued. If we look at the sales revenue, where we have comparable data for 15 countries, the share of digital and audio was slightly up compared to 2020. And in about a third of those countries, sales revenue was significantly up, notably in Finland, Japan, Norway, and Sweden. And Japan and Finland had 5% increase in market share. If we look at the title level data, we have data for 18 countries, then the share was greater than 30% in 10 of those, and more than 50% in Brazil, Finland, and Sweden. If we turn to bricks and mortar, the breakdown of the sales between bricks and mortar and online has basically stagnated. We have comparable data for 14 countries, and online sales were more than 2/3 of the total publishing industry in the UK, and 1/3 in Finland, Sweden, Turkey, and the US. But overall, generally, no discernible change in the market share for online sales. I'm conscious that despite trying to give you simple figures, slowly delivered, there was quite a lot there. So, in summary, sales revenue growth was 11% for the countries where we had comparable data. There was modest growth in market share for digital and audio, and no change for the share between online bricks and mortar. Thank you. Porter.
Thank you, Kevin. This is what the World Intellectual Property Organization does for us. It actually goes across the borders and starts coalescing information so that we can understand the world industry as a world industry. It's an incredible service, and I want to thank Karsten, who has done such a great job on the figures, as well as Kevin, for bringing them to us this morning. This is a very fine report. I urge you to go look at it and to get the whole thing. It's quite informative. I think I'd like to start by speaking with Badur about this and to ask her what she feels of it. I want to tell you that when the pandemic struck, as we first were realizing what we were into, and as she began to travel quite bravely to meet with many of the publishers around the world and understand the impact that was being experienced by them, one of the first things she did was to create a report that, again, brought together many of our publishers' associations from around the world to understand better how they were feeling it. And it was the first picture we had across this entire industry of how disparate the responses were, how one country was getting one response, another country was getting an entirely different response. Badur has worked with data from the beginning in her work, and particularly brought that intelligent language to her work at the IPA. Badur, when you hear what Kevin is telling us today, with that kind of experience you have in data, what's top of mind for you? What stands out?
Thank you, Porter. First of all, I just want to thank you for the kind introduction earlier this morning. And I just want to say IPA is really proud to partner with WIPO on this report. And for us, data is key. It's a very important aspect of the work that we do. And we'll talk a little bit later about why it's important. But I just want to touch upon what you mentioned earlier about the reports that we put together in IPA.
Right.
So when the pandemic started, our members who are from all over the world, we have 92 members from 76 countries, reached out to us, and we heard first-hand reports about how they were doing in their parts of the world. And we wanted to collect that data and make it available for our members to use as positive examples of how they overcame some of their challenges. So this report, which you can find it on the IPA website, is called From Response to Recovery. It was put together in 2020, actually in November 2020, where we interviewed 30-plus publishing associations from around the world that are roughly 70% of the global publishing industry and account to more than 3 billion readers. Based on this data and on the WIPO report, there are a few key findings that have come to my attention. The first is that there's been an uneven market impact and recovery. So as Kevin just said earlier, we found places like the developed markets in France, Germany, and the US, they experienced significant market declines during the initial pandemic wave, but they rebounded very quickly. Some places in double digits. So countries like the US, Italy, Finland, France, and Portugal posted double digits growth in revenue according to last year's WIPO report. However, less developed publishing markets are still suffering to this day, and they have a very uneven recovery. Generally, countries with large domestic markets, more mature digital economies, large trade publishing markets, and countries that have governments that support the cultural industries recovered faster. So that was the first theme that I picked up from the WIPO report and from IPA's findings. And the second theme that I picked up was digital transformation and acceleration. So the pandemic induced sort of like a digital transformation across most of the publishing market. The acceleration is still unclear and uneven. So for example, many publishers, especially the smaller publishers coming from emerging markets, were very reliant on single clients, the retail channels, sectors, book market format, and they had problems with their supply chain. And so for them, digital transformation was a big challenge. The pandemic pushed all publishers to move into digital, but not all of them managed to make that transition smoothly. For example, in Japan, as we can see from the report, a lot of digital and audio books have been coming into production lately, and we see this boom in many parts of the world as well. So we see a lot of changes. We see a lot of technology-induced changes happening in the publishing industry, but again, the recovery has been uneven.
Very good points, and quite insightful, particularly in the digitization issue, I think. In some markets, we're seeing one happy response. There was a much stronger response to audiobooks from men and boys. And of course, one of the great struggles of our industry is constantly to get guys to read as well as women do. They like listening because they can do other things. And this, in some markets, tends to be one of the digitization elements that's hanging on. And instead of fading back into the background and going back to print, these guys are hanging on to their audiobooks and continuing to listen. We may have made a gain in that way. Deborah, may I ask you now to give us some thoughts, please? And I think we'll want to listen to your interpreter as you do it. Yeah?
I hope you can hear me. Okay, basically, I would like to thank you for the invitation, for being here. I come from quite far away, so far away that sometimes it's really hard to find us in statistics. But this question of not appearing in many statistics, this has to do with the fact that we are in the periphery, not only due to the fact that Argentina at this moment does not have lots of reliable data. I mean, there are some data, like the Cámara Argentina del Libro, the Argentinian Chamber of Books, and there is a specialty about these data. It's production data. We don't have sales data. We have registers, the ISBN, for example. We have production numbers, but not the real sales numbers from Argentina. And this is something special. And there is another specialty concerning the 44 million examples of books that have been published concerning novelties, 36 million in 2015. So the reprint is not included because in Argentina you don't have to register the reprint. So the reality that I'm showing is quite partial. But I think it's also important to say that I'm representing here authors. And it's quite an interesting thing to say, because in these statistics, usually you see the behavior of the publishing industry from the moment where the book is produced, but not the author's production. This means the creative work is not really included. So if I'm going to give you some numbers, I would like you to ask you to think about it. What could be the other variables that have to be added to really understand to which extent are we really involved, the authors, in this creative process? How do we participate in this process? And we also should think about future politics and policies to support the creative work. So the 36,400 something novelties that have been published, and 11,000 were digital books. There is a tendency that we see in Argentina, which is included in these figures, in this roughly 11,000 digital books and roughly 23 million physical books. So we still have a high traffic of physical books in Argentina. It was very interesting to hear in the last presentations, because we have a big paper problem in Argentina. Apart from international costs of paper, also monopolies of paper industries that we have. The delivery is it's not only a delivery problem to our country, but also some companies that produce paper, they have a monopoly position in the market. So it's really hard to get paper at the moment in Argentina. How does this impact the authors and their creation? And what can we do about it to defend bibliodiversity? Because if it's hard to get paper, for example, and if we see that the production of books is declining, compared to 2020, or looking at the pandemic, for example, there was a drop of almost 50%. In 2021, we had a growth again, 279%. But if we look at 2014, we are back to that level, and also due to the economic crisis in Argentina, we were not able to get back to these figures. So I think these are all the data that I can give you here today.
Thank you. It's very helpful, actually. And I'm impressed you're speaking not only about bibliodiversity, of course, but also about the invisibility at times of the creator and how difficult it is. I think that in so many things that we deal with in the industry as a business, data, of course, is at hand. And if we learn, as WIPO is helping us do, to access it and to interpret it and to use it more readily, we're only doing ourselves a favor. This is harder to get hold of when you get into the creative side, to find the artists who are working and maybe we don't even know yet because we haven't read their books yet. It's quite a struggle to bring these two kingdoms together at times in the industry. Ronald, let me turn to you, if I may. And when you hear these initial comments that Kevin has brought us from the study, what's top of mind for you?
Well, firstly, I kindly received a report already last week, so could prepare a little bit. And then for me, there are 4 key findings in this report. And the first key finding is that I'm very happy, and I think we can all be very happy to be in the book industry, because it's a very resilient industry. Other industries have been hit much harder by the pandemic, are still recovering, and many, especially the big book markets, not only are immune to the pandemic, many publishers even grew their business in the last 2 years with record sales and record profits, because people were reading more during the pandemic, that more time in isolation, of course. So I think that's good news for all of us in this room and this audience. The second key finding is that that some countries seem to be leading the way, and I think we can make a projection how the future development will be for digital content and audio content. Some Nordic European countries or Japan have high percentages of digital audio content, and I think all the other countries will follow suit at some point of time. So we have to be prepared for a much higher rate of digital consumption of content. I think that's very important for publishers to decide on production, on investments, and so forth. The third thing I haven't a clear opinion on, I have to admit, is academic versus trade publishing. This number varies across countries quite dramatically. There's some countries with like 70–80% of academic publishing compared to trade publishing. In most developed countries, it's like usually 20% academic, 25% academic, and the majority is trade. Now, this might lead us to different conclusions. Either some countries don't invest enough in education, which would be bad news, or maybe there's room for expansion in other countries for trade publishing. So we could try and make people read more. But I think there might be problems with the data as well. I happen to be vice chairman of the International ISBN Agency, and we collect data from all 170 or 80 ISBN agencies worldwide, and that's just top-level data. Now, getting this data in the first place is really hard. Getting reliable data is really hard. And if you have like more in-depth data, like academic versus trade or digital versus print, it becomes much harder to compare data across different countries. So the results of the study might be a little bit skewed. We don't know that. And the fourth thing I learned in this report, and this is in line with observations we did in different countries. We have businesses in US and Canada and Brazil, Mexico, UK, Germany. So what we saw in most countries was a surge in book publishing, especially in self-publishing. Again, it's just an observation. I have no reliable data on that, but it's very easy to conclude that people with COVID and isolation and all the rest of it had just more time to write books. Not only read books, but write books. And we see that in the numbers of ISBNs assigned in many countries, in actual fact.
It's interesting you say that. The folks at Amazon Publishing, based in London, that division, told me that one of the surprises they had was that the author who was supposed to come in with one book, right, would turn up with 3 books after the first year of the pandemic. They really did have more time to write. And this was a mixed blessing, of course, because when you're not ready to publish 3 books, it's a bit of a surprise that they arrive. It's very interesting you're mentioning the educational balance, too, with the trade. I know that the Africa Publishing Innovation Fund that is based in IPA has done a great deal of work with this, because so many of the African markets that we admire and are working so hard to develop are finding that the overhang of so much educational publishing can make it very hard for the trade to find any traction, if you will, in the marketplace. It's a very perceptive point. Badur, when we look at why do your stakeholders value data, what's your sense for this?
I think it's really important to take note that the pandemic was a wake-up call for publishers and publishing associations around the world. And through our study in IPA, we found that publishing-specific stimulus programs were not really given to all of our associations around the world, because publishers didn't have data to quantify the negative impacts of the pandemic. So data is really key in engaging governments in lobbying for programs that give stimulus to grants, for example, to publishers associations, to projects that support publishing. So we need data to push publishing at the top of agenda for governments. And the publishing industry can really be a major driver of sustainable development and economic growth. But a key weakness is mobilizing government support for this. So data can help us do that. And data-driven advocacy strategies are really key to engaging with governments. And we've seen that in some of our markets and some of our association members who have expressed satisfaction with their governments supporting them in their programs, and that's because they had accurate data and good numbers to support their cause.
Wonderful facts, isn't it? How great they work when you've got them. Yeah, indeed. Ronald, may I come back to you on this point? You do so much work that is data-driven, and in fact, you are, I know, educating a great many of your clients in this. What is the value to your stakeholders of this kind of work?
There's a saying that data is the new oil, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. And you need data at all levels for better decisions.
Yeah.
And that starts at a bookshop level.
Yeah.
They need to decide which books to order, how to arrange books, and they do that increasingly on the basis of data. That's metadata we supply, for example, that's sales data that they receive. They can see new trends in publishing much quicker with the right data. And in Germany, we did a study, what is the underlying motive for reading and buying books. So how does a consumer make a purchasing decision for a book? And the results are quite interesting. Would last a bit too long to explain it in detail, but it allows booksellers to arrange books and to purchase books in a way that they increase sales. Mm-hmm. For publishers, the same thing. They need to know the trends in publishing. Is vampire still a big thing, or is it going away? And it goes all the way up to the political level. I can name a couple of examples later, but policy decisions need to be based on data, or better policy decisions need to be based on data. So especially when it comes to copyright exemptions, that's one very important issue which we have to battle all the time. And it's much easier and much more convincing if you can base your arguments on real and reliable data.
It's so interesting you mentioned the copyright exception situation. I was just speaking with our Canadian colleagues. They've had such a terrible problem with an educational exception that was very badly written, as you may know, many years ago into the legislative process, and now they're actually looking to the not quite so new government to make the move it has promised to make and address this, and it hasn't happened yet. They are still hanging fire in Canada after many years of really damaging results from the wrong decision in copyright, and this could have been helped so much with a better data profile than was being used and a better understanding of what they were doing. So thank you for that. Kevin, may I ask you, you guys are investing so much, obviously, in your work with data and your interpretation of it. Where is this value for your stakeholders?
Well, our principal stakeholders are member states,
Right.
and therefore policymakers, and each of the speakers has referred to policymakers. We have a number of economic reports that we put together, and the principal one of those is the Global Innovation Index. It's the size of a telephone directory, and we have 132 member states who contribute data to this. And there are 81 economic indicators in that report, and that ranges from inward investment, SMEs, exports, and the like. So much, much broader than the creative industries. But to the real question of how important is this data, well, we did a survey amongst those member states, and 70% of them, 70% replied that they actually use that Global Innovation Index data to research and make policy. So they really do look at it. Very entertainingly, some of them come to us and say, our GII ranking, where we're 5th in the world or 25th in the world, we'd like to improve that, please, because our neighboring member state is doing a bit better than us, and we'd like to catch up with them. Of course, I can name no names. Now, we cannot actively help a member state to competitively improve their GII ranking, but what we can do, and what we do, is provide the data, and we provide advice on economic infrastructure, which ultimately feeds into that. So it's massively important.
I think it's a huge service that you're providing the inspiration for them to move forward.
Well, it's actually
great.
quite fun,
Yeah.
because there are a number of member states who run major press conferences every year,
Right.
and the head of state announces, we've moved up 2 notches in the GII ranking. So some of them are quite competitive, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good.
Exactly. Competition makes everyone better.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. Deborah, may I start with you in asking, I'm going to ask each of our friends here for a specific example, something that gives us a concrete understanding of a use for data, please. Would you start us off there?
Bueno, desde la Unión de Escritoras y Escritores,
We have a union of authors. When we started to work, we had a basic concept. We said that writing is work. In everything that creative work, that intellectual work is doing, usually it's not very well remunerated, and it's sometimes not even considered to be a real work, a real job. And it's not self-evident that you have to be professional and that you need time for that. During the pandemic, I can tell you 2 anecdotes. I think that has to do also with the copyright that we have already heard about. Around the middle of the pandemic, for example, some big publishers, international publishers, decided to share some of their books for free. I fully understand that it was a very special moment, and everything that we could do to improve and alleviate a little bit the isolation was good. Well, in Argentina, and specifically in Buenos Aires, because there is a big concentration of things that happens in big cities and also of the population. So we tried to show PDFs of everything we were doing, and we also talked about democratization of culture. This is something we have to defend because the demographic access is very important for a pluralist society. But at the same time, we were asking ourselves, what do we do with all this? Because if we, the authors, for example, if we have to live from copyright, we have a problem. So either we have to find a way to get remuneration for our work that we are doing as authors, for our creative work, or we have to think in other politics and policies of democratic access to publishing. I mean, it's a material good, a book, and it shows and also this conversation shows that we are really thinking about it, and that books have a material and economic value, but a book is also a social good, be it digital or in paper. And this is where the most fragile point comes in for the authors. Because we could be the losers in this. We said that we wanted to generate something for the first time, which was a system of tariffs, where all the activities are listed that have to be done by an author. So you have to write a prologue, for example, you have to write chapters, you have to participate in anthologies. So all these jobs and works usually are not listed like these in other parts of the world. So I think it would be really great that the WIPO could register all these tasks. But usually, in Argentina at least, they are not paid, or they get very little remuneration. So, I mean, you have already written a book. Couldn't you write a prologue? This is what normally is being said. But it's years and years of studies also to write a good prologue, for example, an anthology or whatever. So I think we have to think about these tariffs, and the data about that has to be shared. This is one concrete example of what we have done, and we have more proposals that I can share with you if you are interested in. Thank you.
It's very helpful, thank you. And I understand exactly what you're saying there. Yeah. Ronald, do you have examples you can bring forward for us here?
Yeah, I have a couple of examples for the German market, because we are actively involved in policy making and usually consulted when new laws come into play regarding copyright. So there was one decision 2 or 3 years ago to have a wider copyright exemption for digital course packs. So professors at universities can use a certain percentage, a relatively high percentage, of a textbook free of charge in a digital course pack. And it was agreed to review that law after 3 years, and by the use of data we could actually prove that the sales of textbooks decreased quite dramatically because of these free digital course packs. It doesn't always mean we get the policymakers back on the right track, but at least we can have a substantial argument with them. And the same applies to e-lending. So free lending of e-books in public libraries. It's a highly debated topic in many, many countries. And by the use of data, we could prove that the increase of free e-lending is outpacing the individual sale of e-books quite dramatically. So there is a high correlation, and we could prove that. And the same holds true, that's a relatively new initiative. It's only one state in Germany. They want to completely abolish printed books at school. And replace them by iPads or tablets. And the budget they have per pupil is 1,500 euros, which is the same in dollars, unfortunately, at the moment. But anyway, and out of these 1,500 euros, they want to spend 50 euros on content, and 1,450 on technology, hardware. And again, we're monitoring that. We track how the sales of school books evolves, and we can tell the policymakers, hey, your decision had exactly this impact, this dramatic impact on the generation of educational content.
The ability to demonstrate that impact is what's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the shiny new toys. It does get to us on technology, doesn't it? Incredible. Those are beautiful examples. Thank you. Badur, what examples can you offer us?
So I think I want to talk a little bit about the example of international cooperation, because IPA and WIPO have been partnering together on this report since 2017. And this is a good example of cooperation between two international organizations to steward a global industry dialogue on publishing and engage in the new emerging trends. And through the initial report that IPA conducted in 2020 that we spoke about earlier, we found that markets where there was more cooperation, more partnership, and more engagement between stakeholders staged faster recoveries. So when I talk about ecosystem players, I'm talking about authors and publishers and booksellers and librarians and the whole value chain of publishing. And when all of these came together to put together a roadmap for their industry, they recovered much faster. And this led to us being inspired to form the Inspire Plan in IPA, which was one of the initiatives that I spearheaded during my presidency. And it was about bringing together global stakeholders around a unified common vision to move the industry forward and to find out what are the opportunities and how we can really come together and create a roadmap for our future. So that's one example. And I also want to talk a little bit about Publish Her. Publish Her is an organization that I formed in 2019. And it is an organization that is informal in supporting women in the publishing industry. And through our events and networking opportunities, we collected data and findings from our members, and we produced a toolkit, a diagnostic toolkit that helps us really support gender diversity and inclusion in the publishing industry. And all of you can find that on our website, womeninpublishing.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I cannot recommend Publish Her enough. It's such a marvelous thing. I've seen meetings occurring in so many parts of the world where Badur, of course, was traveling to speak to publishers. And she brings everybody together and gets them talking about the issues behind our great separation in genders, which just needs to change. And she is a change leader in this, and so is that organization. Thank you for that. Kevin, may we come to you then? I know you have examples, Kevin.
Lots of examples. Perhaps the best example is one which predates my time at WIPO, in fact. I was in the UK, and the UK government came up with this great idea to massively increase the level of a work, the percentage of a work that could be copied under the education exception. And what was really interesting is, obviously, lots and lots of people went to the minister and said, yes, we agree with it, or no, we don't agree with it. But I commissioned a very expensive report, an economic impact analysis, and I presented that to the minister. And it was basically that which defeated the argument. Now, I didn't realize at the time, but I got to know that minister quite well, and she spoke to me a few months afterwards, and she said, do you know, Kevin, out of the 50 or so lobbying groups who came to me for or against this education exception, you were the only one who brought really hard economic impact analysis. And it was on that basis that I made my decision.
That's a perfect example of the example. Yeah, that just says it all. The fact that you're able to arrive with that clarity and that accuracy is really what it means. We are getting close to the end of our time together, and what I'd like to do before we talk a little further with our group here is ask if you have questions here in our audience that you'd like to put to one or more of our panelists. If you don't, that's fine. If you do, though, I'd like to stop at this point to make sure we have a chance to hear from you. Just raise your hand if you have something. See if I can see with the glare going on here. Nope. Everybody's okay? Am I missing anyone? I see a picture being taken over there. That's good. Great. I think we can move forward then for a couple more minutes here. And one of the things that we want to talk about, as we have just heard such a perfect example from Kevin here, is what can we do to improve the quality of the data that we're using. You know, in my industry, in journalism, fact-checking has become a massive industry of its own. And we can only use more of it. It's just astonishing how hard it is at this point in history to make sure we're chasing down accurate facts. This is data. This is our end of what we experience as data. What do we need to do to make it better? Kevin, you can talk to us right off the bat on this, of course, because you guys are doing this.
We're trying to do it.
Very well.
You'll notice in the figures I gave that it was 15 countries, 18 countries, 74 countries. So obviously, I would make a big appeal to publishers' associations around the world, please, to work more with us, to give us more data. We're engaging with member states, and actually we're investing a lot of money over the next year or two to help train economists in member states to share their data with us, because many member states aren't gathering their data. So that's a big investment on our part. But publishing industry organizations, publishers associations, that's where we're also focusing. And with the help of Jose, I'm going down to Latin America in, 4 weeks' time, Jose, I think? And we're bringing together all of the Latin American publishers associations. And we're going to ask them, please share the data that you have. And can we invest in some training with you to help you give us some data? So it's a big request, but we're actually investing in training of member states and publishers associations.
I'm glad you're making that mission, because we need that data. We need to understand these cultures and their markets better. But you're right, it does take the cooperation and the understanding on that end of the value that we're talking about today. Ronald, what would you say needs to be done to get the quality of the data up?
Yeah, I can fully support that. But I don't think it's enough just to get the data. You have to make the data comparable across countries, and that's the hardest thing. We regularly take investment decisions in which countries to invest or not, and the main factor, the main decision factor, is the size and the structure of the book market. So how many books are sold in the countries, how many are published, what is the number of books, bookshops, libraries, and so forth. And it's extremely hard to come by those numbers. And even if you get them, you get some numbers from the ISBN agency, then you get something from the Publisher Association. The two sets of numbers don't match. It's really hard to compare them, to interpret them. So I would heavily argue for more standards, not just in sharing the data, but in generating the data, getting the data from the market.
Porter, could I just add something
Please,
to that,
Kevin,
if I
go
may?
right ahead.
I completely agree with Ronald. And one of the other things that our economists do is regularly convene meetings of the economists from member states to try and standardize the type of data and how the data is interpreted. And we did some work over the last 2 years with the Federation of European Publishers also to standardize, which was, I don't know if Anne is still in the room. Oh, Enrique, thank you so much. Yeah, really good work, because the data that was presented earlier and that we're able to present means that we're actually talking about the same thing. Exactly. Really important.
Exactly, and I was going to say that the Aldous Up group is working on this too. They have launched a project to try to get apples and apples comparisons, because even within Europe, you're speaking of the Federation, they are.
That's the best example currently.
Exactly.
That particular collaboration of standardized data.
And we're very excited about that, because we're all dying to be able to actually look at this fact from one market to the next. It'll be so useful to be able to get, as we were saying with Badur's early research during the pandemic. Deborah, can you speak to this and the quality of the data?
¿Puedes decirnos algo sobre calidad de los datos?
Sí, en realidad me gustaría comentar
I
algo.
would like to tell you something concerning standardized data, and to think whether we could perhaps, as we have many variables, for example, for studying and analyzing, and in the best of cases, comparing the publishing market. So perhaps it would be great to have something similar for the world of writers, of authors. I mean, there are so many of them in each and every country, for example. So what is their diffusion in other countries, for example? How many people read them? Some publish, for example, only in the big cities, for example. Some publish across the whole country. So who are the authors and writers who really effectively can live from their copyright? And if that's not the case, for example, what else do they do to make a living? Very often it has to do with the act of writing, but very often it does not. So I think this would also be great to know. It would help us to have a picture of the publishing sector, including creative work, including authors' work. Then I think we would have the whole picture. Because now we only know things after a book has been published, but not in the whole process of making. I think we have to also look at the data that we can compile during the process of making, and how can we also foment and support the author's creative work.
Exactly. And it's so good to have had once more the creative input on this. Badur, you have a last comment, do you, about quality of data for us?
Well, I think everything has been said already, and I agree with all the speakers of the importance of quality data and improving the way we collect data. Partnerships are key. Capacity development is very important in how you collect that data. And we find that that's a big challenge for us as well in IPA when we support WIPO in collecting data for the report, is that a lot of our emerging markets don't actually have the capacity to collect the data. And so this is really great news of the partnership with IPA in going to Latin America and really training some of the associations and helping them to collect quality data. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about a pilot project that we conducted with Nielsen Bookscan. We worked with them closely in Nigeria and Kenya to collect data and point of sales and online sales data. And this was a really good example of cooperation, and we managed to collect some data in some of the markets where we were working in putting together the Lagos Action Plan, which really spearheaded a lot of the work that we do in Africa. So I hope we can see more of that collaboration, more training, and hopefully we'll have better results coming soon.
Hear, hear. I totally agree. And I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank WIPO and the IPA for this terrific new report. The work that you guys are doing is helping all of us get this discussion underway and to keep it moving. Thank you. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Kevin and Badur and Deborah and Ronald. You guys have been terrific with these inputs. Thank you for that. Thank you to our interpreter in the back. Thank you for the good job there. And thank you all for coming. I know that this is a busy, busy day as we all kick off the fair. It's great of you to commit this time to this really important and central issue. Thank you for being with us. As I was saying, if you'd like to stay with us, we have Jesus Badenes coming next from Planeta. He's a fascinating character and very candid when we speak with him. I'm Porter Anderson. I am from Publishing Perspectives. We are the news medium of Frankfurter Buchmesse. We welcome you here. Thank you again for coming, and have a terrific first day at the fair. Thank you.